Hi, I'm Dave Kahle. Welcome to this Christian Business Insights podcast show where my goal is to provide you with practical, actionable ideas to help you create businesses and careers of excellence and at the same time multiply your influence for the kingdom. I have been a Christian in business for over 30 years, and I have personally and contractually consulted with over 500 different sales organizations. So in these podcasts, I combine the lessons that I have learned with an out-of-the-box experience and perspective on Christianity that you will find challenging. And we put that together to provide you with practical insights and ideas that you can use to live better and lead better. Hi, I'm Dave Kahle. And if you're a Christian salesperson, you're dealing with the tensions of being a Christian salesperson, I have some words of encouragement for you. When I first began my sales career, I had this thought. See if you don't agree. The thought was this is going to be tricky. And that was the thought I had when I was hired for my first business sales position as a new Christian. Here's the story. I was working with a recruiter and I'd interviewed for a position that I wanted. And according to the recruiter, all that remained was lunch with the hiring manager and an offer would be forthcoming. That's what he said. At lunch, the manager indicated that the person in the position before me was fired for lying on his expense form. Well, I thought that's an opportunity to, appeal to one of my strengths. So I said, well, I'm a Christian, and that's not something I would do. Lunch ended and no offer came. And in a post-lunch conversation, the recruiter said that the hiring manager was concerned about me voicing my Christianity, afraid that I would try to proselytize the customers. Well, a couple of conversations later, I was hired. And it was then that I thought, this is going to be tricky. Now, that was decades ago. And since then, I have made my living in the world of sales. I had 7 different sales positions, eventually rose to sales manager and general manager, and then became a consultant and speaker, professional speaker and author in the world of sales. So I have been, my whole life has been involved in sales in one way or the other. And believe me, I have lived through the tricky stuff. I have made my mistakes, done some things I wish I hadn't done, learned some lessons. And I've got my personal story, by the way, in one of my books called The Heart of a Christian Salesperson. I'll put a link in the show notes. So I'm going to do a series of podcasts for Christian salespeople, and I share some of the lessons that I've learned along the way. So where do you start? Day one, Christian salesperson. How do you figure this thing out? And my first recommendation is to absorb a mindset. A mindset. How you think of yourself is the starting point. We're told in Romans 12:2, do not be conformed to the pattern of this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. And so too, that applies very specifically to us in this situation. We need to be transformed by the renewing of our mind. The whole thing starts with how we think and how we think about ourselves. You are not a second-class Christian. You have nothing to be ashamed of, nothing to be hesitant to share. On the contrary, it's the opposite of that. You've been selected by God for a very special ministry. You're not a salesperson, you're a minister of sales. Ephesians 2:10 said, we are God's handiwork, created in Christ Jesus to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. Now, what are those good works? Your job is a good work. See, God is salting the world with Christians. He has sprinkled you in the marketplace where you are. He wants to share his love and grace in the entire world, and he sprinkled his people around, and you're one of them. You're salt in the world in which you inhabit. He sprinkled you into this marketplace because he wanted you there. Now that doesn't mean that you are to preach to your customers. It doesn't mean that you have to leave tracts in the waiting rooms. Doesn't mean that, but it does mean certain things. It does mean that you work to manifest the fruit of the Spirit in all of your conversations, in all of your dealings. You try to be, you try to be a Christian in everything you do. And that means that not only do you try to proactively do you try to build the fruit of the Spirit into your lives, but you also refrain from some things that would cast or would reflect poorly on Christ. So that means, no lies to customers. Don't lie. No exaggerations. No unfounded promises. No strip shows with customers. No lewd jokes or vulgar language. It does mean that. It does mean that you strive for excellence and influence. Excellence and influence. Excellence in your job. You ought to try to become the number one salesperson. And influence. As you become excellent, you will gain influence, and you use that influence to salt the world for Christ. So excellence and influence that's your rallying cry. It does mean that you have prepared a response for when someone asks you why you are different. See, if you build the fruit of the Spirit into your life, if you act with discipline, if you act with morality and ethically, people will notice. And some people will ask you, hey, what is it with you? Or whatever. And Peter told us exactly what to do. In 1 Peter 3:15, he said, always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have. So be prepared. Be prepared to give an answer. And that means, you ought to prepare a personal testimony. I've got a link to an article on that as well. It does mean that you take every major proposal and every customer, every visit, every customer, every challenge, you take it to the Lord in prayer before you do anything, Prayer is the first step in anything. So before a sales call, before a plan, before you create a proposal, before a phone call, you just bring it all to the Lord every day, every day. Every day you ask yourself, okay, what would a minister of sales do in this situation? You take on that mindset, and that mindset will reach out and touch everything that you do. Now, your world will be tricky, and there will be lots of situations that seem fuzzy and troubling. Celebrate those. Every bit of adversity, every obstacle, every challenge is an opportunity to grow closer to God and to extend your excellence and influence. Few professions are so full of opportunities to influence others, to contribute to your employer, and to grow closer to God. You are truly in a special place. Good for you. Congratulations. Embrace the mindset. You're a minister of sales. All right? Okay. Bye-bye. We're done.